Thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Dennis Higgins, and I want to thank everyone who came here tonight in an effort to be involved in democracy. I want to thank the young ladies, Katie, Gabby, Siobhan, and Patricia, who provided the music for the occasion. I want to thank my wife and family. Especially, I want to thank Amanda Burns. She was my partner in our efforts to bring Zephyr to Oneonta. These people and many others locally and on the campaign staff worked incredibly hard to make this evening possible. Zephyr Teachout is a law professor at Fordham who has dedicated her career to the study of constitutional law and particularly to examining the pervasive corruption in U.S. politics. In fact, she wrote the book on it, which is due to be published by Harvard Press. Zephyr Teachout's arguments were cited in the Citizens United case by Justice Stevens, sadly to no avail. Zephyr's running mate Tim Wu has popularized the idea of net neutrality and has championed an open internet, an important theme if you're following the Comcast-Time Warner merger. You've probably heard Professor Teachout has racked up endorsements from Matt Ryan, former Binghamton mayor, as well as the New York State Public Employees Federation, New York chapter of the National Organization for Women, the New York chapter of the Sierra Club, The Nation magazine, and many others. Finally, I want to thank and welcome our special guest, Professor Teachout.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you all so much for coming out. And thank you to all of you who have dealt with our changing schedule. I did not expect to see so many of you here tonight. So my name is Zephyr Teachout, and I hope to be the next governor of the state of New York. I'm a traditional Democrat, so I have a vision for New York State, because the traditional jobs of Democrats is to dream big and take care of ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean all of us, not just the wealthy and well-connected. So in my vision, we have the best public schools in the nation. There's no silver bullet for schools, and if anybody tells you there is, they're probably trying to push a testing formula on you. What that means to me is it at least depends upon small class sizes with art and music and sports and counseling, and all of those things cost money. So unlike Governor Andrew Cuomo, I would not begin my administration by pushing for one of the largest cuts to school funding in state history. But I would make sure that we fulfill our obligation to our children, and right now we are about $5.9 billion short, if you count the GEA and what we need to be up to the limit on the constitutional requirements for our kids. I put public education first. I think it's the infrastructure of democracy. And it works when teachers are trusted and have small class sizes and have mentoring programs. Because we know that kids are people, not widgets. So that means that some of them go to school for art and they stick around for math. Or they go to school because maybe they stick around in high school because they love the football program or the after-school newspaper program, and that keeps them in school for something else. I spent time as a classroom teacher. I was actually a special ed teacher's aide and also as a law professor. And I will tell you that they are complex people and need to be paid attention to as individuals. In my vision of New York, we have the most high quality, affordable, higher education in the world. And New York used to have that. Andrew Cuomo said that the tuition was at rock bottom 4 years ago and started raising tuition. He's been part of a raise so that students are taking on more and more debt every year. I think we need to recommit to our public higher education and our higher education in general. For me, that's connected with the next vision, which is a small business economy. So I have a vision of an economy built on small businesses, entrepreneurialism, sustainable agriculture, medium-sized farms, and all of those things actually relate to affordable higher education. Because if you're 28 years old and you have an idea for a new business, or you want to invest in a farm, but you're still carrying around student debt, you're not going to do it. Or if you want to get a job in a high-tech firm, but you haven't been able to afford college, that high-tech firm isn't going to relocate here. So Governor Andrew Cuomo tends to do very spot symbolic actions, and I like his focus on high-tech. But you can't just bring high-tech here without bringing the whole infrastructure that we need to support it. And that is one of the reasons I care about affordable higher education. It's not the only reason. So my vision of a small business economy depends on a few different things. One is we have to support small businesses, which I think both Democrats and Republicans have forgotten for a while. That means easier access to capital. That means great infrastructure. That means eventually single-payer health care. But that also means being a little Teddy Roosevelt and FDR about it and doing a little trust busting. Because part of the reason that small businesses are failing is because big businesses have too much power, and too much power is concentrated in the hands of too few. And those same companies that are making it harder for the restaurant to compete, the restaurant that wants to pay fair wages, the restaurant that wants to innovate, the restaurant that's competing against another chain store that is lowering its prices to kick out the local restaurant, well, those same companies that are choking our small business economy are also the ones that are choking our democracy. Here's my history lesson for tonight. Thomas Jefferson wanted an anti-monopoly clause in the Constitution. In the same letter that he wrote about the First Amendment, he wrote about anti-monopoly, because if we allow too much power to be concentrated in the hands of too few, that's a democratic threat, not just an economic threat. Now, we can forget that. People have a learned helplessness. Like, well, they're just getting bigger and bigger and they're merging. Like these banks, they're merging. These cable companies, they're merging. Big ag, distribution systems, pharma, big oil. Whatever area you're in, you see merger after merger and you can say, well, that's just the market, but it's not just the market. We have traditionally used the tools of antitrust as well as lending systems to make sure that we support a small business economy instead of a concentrated economy. And I am lucky enough to be running with Tim Wu, who not only invented the term net neutrality, but has worked at the Federal Trade Commission and spent his life fighting big cable. He's a born trust buster. That's the trust of big cable. I myself started a group after the financial crisis, after 2008, dedicated to breaking up big banks. When I say we're old-fashioned trust busters, this isn't something we woke up yesterday about. This is who we are. And both of us have testified before the Public Service Commission and asked for New York State, which has the power to stop the Time Warner Comcast merger in New York State. We've testified that we have to stop it because it does not serve the public interest. And here's your legal lesson for tonight. It's actually a burden on the cable companies to prove that it is in the public interest to merge in New York State. They have not met their burden. If the merger goes through, it's going to cost more for everybody every month, as much as $50 per month. And cable bills are already too high. They're way too high. It's not good service, and the bills are too high. It's not working. We shouldn't be merging. But also, it's really bad for our media environment. If you have media companies that are either owned by or dependent on the cable companies to get their information to you, you're not going to hear about as much. You don't hear about the Comcast-Time Warner merger on the Time Warner stations. So we need it for ourselves as being part of a democracy, but it's also bad for the high-tech economy that New York can have and be the hub of. And we really can be the center of sort of the next generation high-tech, because app developers who become dependent on Comcast become essentially owned by Comcast instead of being able to compete in an open marketplace. So in my vision of New York, we're trust busters. And now let's get to the easy part. We have to ban fracking. And we have to ban fracking waste. And we have to stop building an infrastructure that is built for fracked gas. Andrew Cuomo said he'd rely on the science. I guess he hasn't been reading the compendium recently, because the science is in. This is way too dangerous for our water and for our air and for our kids and for our agriculture, and we cannot afford to follow the path of Pennsylvania. But what we can do is follow the path of the Solutions Project and others which have laid out how New York can be the leader in the country in renewable energy, with solar farms and offshore winds. As Josh Fox, who I'm proud to say endorsed me, said, you shouldn't be able to build another parking lot unless it's a solar parking lot. So let's build towards that renewable future, which, by the way, is consistent with wineries and consistent with agro-tourism and consistent with value add, instead of a hydro-fracking future, which is inconsistent with the best that New York has to offer. The one last part of my vision I'm going to tell you is that I have a vision of New York State as the center of 21st century transportation technologies. And to me, that's part of our energy future, is figuring out how to make public transit systems that reach far more people. We have one of the largest transit economies in the world, the third largest in New York State. So how can we, instead of barely keeping up with our infrastructure, invest in our infrastructure, but also invest in cutting-edge transportation and information technologies that connect people who are isolated to communities, connect farming to cities, make it easier to have the sustainable farming of New York be the crops of that be the food that you're eating in Manhattan restaurants. And we have a lot of high-tech folks who are really excited about our campaign, who say New York can be the center of that if we decide that we want to invest in that. So I supported Andrew Cuomo 4 years ago. I had, as a child, been very excited by his father and his father's moral language. I actually ended up being a death penalty lawyer, and when his father spoke so eloquently about the death penalty and about our obligations to those who are the most hated in a society, that I found very moving. And then when Andrew Cuomo ran, he said he was going to clean up Albany. Do you remember that? He stood on the steps of a courthouse named after Boss Tweed and said there is corruption in Albany that would make Boss Tweed blush. and I am going to clean it up. I am going to return dignity to the office of governor, he said. I am going to close the loophole that allows corporations to donate directly to candidates in New York State. But the most important thing he said to me, there are two things. One is that he would veto any incumbent protection gerrymandering, because this is a democratic state. You may not always feel that, but it is a democratic state. It is 60% Democratic, 30% Republican. So if we had fair districts, we would have an overwhelming majority in the New York State Senate. And he said, I'll veto, because there was a redistricting, I'll veto redistricting that leaves this imbalance in place. And then the most important promise he made for me, because it's something I have spent my life working on in my writing, in my activism, I've been very involved in this, is he said he would pass public funding of elections. A system which would allow anybody to run for office if they had grassroots support. Well, he has broken every single one of those promises. Not only are there more scandals, ethics scandals in Albany, but he's taken more money in that corporate loophole than any other governor or any other political figure in New York history. $6 million. $6 million from corporations. He didn't veto the redistricting. In fact, he has been very happy with a Republican-controlled Senate instead of a Democratic-controlled Senate. And he's failed to pass public financing of elections. He's looted from schools to pay for tax breaks for big banks, and his economic policy is indistinguishable from that of Ronald Reagan. It is trickle-down economics, and it doesn't work. His agenda has not been a democratic agenda. It has been bank tax repeal. That's what he fought for. Millionaires tax repeal. That's what he fought for. And at the same time, we have schools that really need help. We have municipalities that are starving. And he has a habit of starving schools and cities and then blaming the schools and blaming the cities for their failures. So not only did he do that, but then he, under pressure, because he had been the cleanup guy, he creates a Moreland Commission to investigate public corruption. And he gave a press conference in which he said, "You can sleep better at night now that I've created this commission. It can investigate anything, even me. And it can come up with whatever results it thinks are best, not just to investigate acts of corruption, but to propose results." Well, the result it proposed was public financing of elections. And then the minute it started investigating his close business associates, he shut it down. I think that might make Boss Tweed blush. Shutting down your own anti-corruption commission when it starts finding corruption in your neighbor, that's blushable. And then his response after that, especially after this New York Times story, has just been terrible, because it's been, what has Andrew Cuomo's response been? What has Andrew Cuomo's response been to the allegations that his top aide was meddling and telling what subpoenas to put out and what subpoenas not to? Silence. He hasn't answered questions about, early on he said, it's my commission. It's mine, which is unfortunately the way I think he sees the state, is a tool to be used for his own ends as opposed to a place for which he is the servant. But he has actually failed to answer the most basic questions. Like, what was he involved in what his top aide did? What did he know? When did he know it? I mean, these are pretty classic questions. And what public good did it serve? But you guys know about that silence, because he has been silent on so much else. He has been silent on fracking. He has been silent, for the most part, on the privatization of health facilities. He has been silent about whether or not he's going to debate me. Yeah, this guy's done everything he could to get rid of me. He tried to keep me off the ballot. He tried to kick me off the ballot. He tried to appeal kicking me off the ballot. He's supposed to not be paying attention to me, but I think it's all he's doing. In the last campaign filing, he spent $2.5 million. Didn't seem to work. Every day I get more attention. So I want to tell you one last story. I just think he's failed in the basic job of leadership. He's failed as a Democrat, but he's also failed as a leader, because you have to explain yourself as a leader. You're going to make mistakes. That's part of what it is to be an executive. But you have to come before people and answer questions, or go on television and answer questions. The only interviews that he does, do you guys know about this? It's actually really shocking. He doesn't do televised interviews. He only does interviews on the radio when he's not at the station. In other words, where you can have your cheat sheet out and your staff there. I mean, he would not do very well on Common Core. There's a bubble sheet for governor. For what it's worth, I'm opposed to Common Core. I'm happy to answer that in the questions. But I want to tell you one last story before I open it up to questions. And I really, again, appreciate this extraordinary crowd. You guys are the reason we're going to win this in 10 days. We are going to have the upset of the century. We are going to break the glass ceiling in New York State politics and have the first female governor. And I know we're breaking some eggs with this old boys club, but it's a lot of fun to run against them because they don't know what to do. But the story I want to tell you is that I'm not just running against Andrew Cuomo. I'm running against a kind of politics of austerity and cynicism and fear. Because when I was a special ed teacher's aide, I had a kid that I worked with. It was a third grade classroom. I had a kid that I worked with who had been in 5 foster homes. It was a small rural public school, and came. He had a bit of a temper, and he told me, "I have no imagination. I'm stupid." And so I was working with him on math and on writing, and so every week when he was supposed to write, he would just scribble. And just scribble. And eventually I started reading those scribbles aloud to him, and he got a real kick out of that, because I was like, "This is the story you wrote." He'd be like, "Tell me the story." So he'd scribble, and I'd read it out loud, and then one week I scribbled, and he read it out loud. I was like, "Well, now you have an imagination." He said, no, that he told this story about trolls and traveling with his brother and visiting all these islands, and he said, no, I don't have an imagination. I'm just reading what you wrote. But then he started doing better in math. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, I don't know the answers." I'm like, "Why are you doing better?" And he said, "Oh, well, when I crack my knuckles, the trolls that are asleep in my knuckles crawl up my arm, and crawl into my ear and whisper the answers to the problems." He was going to hold on to that idea of himself as stupid, but you could see how that attention made a difference. And I don't know that those 6 months I spent with him made a difference, but I know that the years of public education where there were the resources to spend time with him do make a difference. And when a kid who's that age, an 8-year-old kid, says they have no imagination, that's just not true. Somebody has told them that. But when a state says it has no imagination, when it can't fund its schools, it can't dream big anymore, that's also not true. Because New York has this vast and generous and creative heart. It is the most egalitarian state, and it should not be the most unequal state, which is what it is right now. It is this extraordinary, imaginative state, and I am tired of politicians telling us that we can't dream big and do the basic job of government. So I'm not just running against Andrew Cuomo, although that, as far as I'm concerned, is enough of a reason to be in the race. I'm running because this state deserves so much more and has so much more to offer than we are currently providing. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Now, I'm happy to take questions, or I can just tell you in 1 minute how I'm going to win. You guys want to know that? Okay. We think about 700,000 people are going to vote in this primary. So how many people are in this room? So we think it's going to be nothing. It's going to be 500,000 to 700,000 based on past primaries. So we need 350,000 votes to win. So that means that we need all of you to get, if I'm a crowd counter, I don't know how many people in this room, but I think I see about 10,000 votes in this room. Because if you go out and get your 100 friends, there's 10,000 votes in this room. And we are knitting together those votes, because all I'll tell you is once we have name recognition, in the polling, we really don't have any serious polling out there, but the polling is once people know that I exist, they are happy about it. So my main job is to let people know that there is a serious person running against Andrew Cuomo who is ready to be governor of the state of New York. So that's how we're going to win. And now I'll take questions. I'll take questions or comments. I also like comments because I want to learn. I think one of the jobs of a governor is curiosity. Andrew Cuomo and I also disagree on that.
My name is Kevin Clark. I'm proud to be a 35-year veteran teacher of the New York State Public School System. I'm equally proud to be president of the Repealing the Teachers Association, Level 12410 of New York State teachers, 600,000 members strong. Although NYSET voted strategically, perhaps, a no endorsement of the governor, thousands of our members are registered Democrats and will be voting in the primaries for the candidate that best aligns with his or her values. On May 4th of this year, I stood in the freezing rain outside of the Lake Placid Lodge with over 500 protesters, including NYSET President Karen McGee and American Federation Teacher President Randy Weingart. Inside the hotel, a group of Wall Street anti-union people were meeting to reform public education by strategizing how to privatize it. Well, Governor Cuomo was invited to this and planning to meet with these corporate leaders. Parents, students, teachers union representatives, those who are the true stakeholders in education, were barred from attending. New York State has signed a $32 million contract with Pearson Publishing Company to create, implement, and provide training for us, the testing of our students. This British-owned, for-profit company determines what questions will be on the test, how long the test will be, and what the cutoff scores will be to label our students as being proficient or in need of improvement. High-stake tests also weigh heavily in teacher evaluations. We know we're Governor Cuomo's side when it comes to public versus private education, and we know where the governor stands on high-stakes testing and who should be profiting from the over-testing of our students. What is your position on high-stakes testing and on corporate attempts to take the public out of New York State public schools? Can we count on you to join with us and send out a message that New York State public schools are not for sale?
Thank you for that eloquent speech. I was in tweet spirit at the picket in the Pines. I thank you for actually being extraordinary leaders in calling out Governor Cuomo's privatization of our public schools. Thank you for that. I know the difference between a person and a Pearson. And I am opposed to high-stakes testing, and I am opposed to private corporations. These are two separate things, but they're both important. And I'm opposed on both fronts to high-stakes testing because it brings stress into the classroom, and stress is not the right way for children to learn. And also because it pulls the extraordinary creativity and talent of teachers out of the classroom. It is as if we are taking the best part out and instead replacing it with stress. And I feel very strongly about that. Andrew Cuomo, only under the pressure, your pressure and other people's pressure, pulled back partially on teacher evaluations, but not fully, and not as a principled stance, just for 2 years. But teachers are still evaluated in part on the basis of these tests. And what that does is it tells teachers that their students are the obstacles between them and whether or not they can pay for their mortgage. And that's the wrong kind of relationship. You guys understand that? Because depending on how, Larry does, I may make less or more money. So suddenly Larry is, if he's doing poorly on the test, he's suddenly the obstacle instead of the kid you're serving. So I feel very strongly about that, and I also feel very strongly about the private control, the lack of transparency, the gag rules that are put on teachers, and the private power that is behind these tests, because no matter what they say about this being for the public good, fundamentally, Pearson's a profit-making entity. And teachers go into education not to make a profit. They go in to serve their kids. So I have far greater trust in parents and teachers than in Pearson to develop the standards that our children need.
Have you thought about ways to put the brakes on the build out of the infrastructure? In other words, the building of more and more pipelines that are being expedited by Cuomo, by his PSC, and by the federal, by FERC.
Yes.
How could you, as governor, stop or slow that down?
Well, one thing we can do is make sure that there are real environmental impact statements before the build-out. Instead, under Governor Cuomo, we've seen either hasty, non-transparent, non-updated in all of those three things, and we've seen basically a revolving door between the gas industry and who's appointed in positions of power. So who you pick matters, how committed you are to transparency matters, and serious environmental impact statements matter. There's also a role for a governor. Some of these projects are vetoable, so that's another role. And the other is just a role of actively moving away, because we can't just ban one. We actually have to be actively building in the other direction. So one of my first acts as governor will be to do a feasibility study on the Jacobson plan and start moving quickly. You guys are as quiet as Andrew Cuomo. There we go.
A lot of attention's been focused in education on the high-stakes testing, and by that, most of the people are talking about the 3 through 8 tests. Cuomo put out a big, like you said, this one little thing that he would push off all the results of Common Core testing till this year's 4th graders got to high school. But this year's 9th graders had to take the Common Core Regents in algebra. Mm-hmm. They will take the Common Core Regents in geometry next year. There's a 1-year waiver where you could pass the old test again instead, which many of our kids did. But next year's 9th graders will have to pass the Common Core Algebra Regents or they don't graduate. This year's juniors and next year's juniors will have to pass the Common Core ELA test. The RCT exams are gone. Duncan has said that he wants the standard for high school graduation to be the AP tests. New York State, John King, and the other Regents Fellows have said they are designing these new Regents on the AP exams, and that's the standard that they want for high school graduation. To get into Fordham, sure. For all of New York State, we need something else. There are no layers of diplomas anymore.
And the thing that concerns me is many politicians are coming out against the testing. The beast is really this whole Common Core and the associated requirements. So I was wondering what your feeling was on that.
Yeah, I've been openly, first of all, hello to the bats. I was happy to, happy birthday plus 2 months, I believe.
Yep.
1 year and 2 months, and the bats have become a real force in politics, and I am so happy to see you standing up and proud, unashamed, not just about the implementation. I have come out openly against Common Core, period. I wrote an op-ed about it. I'd be happy to share it with you. But basically, you know, I talked about trust busting. This is, again, a story, if you peek under the hood, about concentrated private power taking over democratic power. Because this is Bill Gates spending $200 million. That is not where any standard should be coming from. So, yes, I agree, and thank you for being here. Oh, and I am very proud. I got the list of National Organization for Women, the Nation, the Sierra Club, but they forgot to mention the public, did he mention the Public Employees Federation? Yeah. Okay, but they forgot to mention the Badass Teachers Association. Yes.
Where are you in making health care more affordable?
Was the question where?
Well, I fill out a lot of paperwork, some state, some federal, some county. It's all the same to me.
Yeah.
I just want to know how you're going to make healthcare better for.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is another area where Andrew Cuomo and I really disagree. I don't know if you've heard about Long Island College Hospital, Litch, in Brooklyn, but I was there this morning protesting the closure of Litch. The number of hospitals in Brooklyn has cut by half since 1980. And what Andrew Cuomo has said in response to substantial protests around Litch is that basically the future does not have room for more hospitals because they are not profitable. I do not think the question in providing health care is whether or not it is profitable. So I think it is a basic state obligation, but one of the problems we've had repeatedly is that do you know that the New York governor is the most powerful governor of all the 50 states? I don't mean this one. I mean just because of the structural capacities that the governor has, in part because of the board appointments, the commission appointments, the budgetary power. And so what I'd like to see is more of a move towards community health boards that do community health assessments. What Andrew Cuomo fails to do, what his administration fails to do frequently is Department of Health assessments about the impacts of closures to make sure that people still have access to the care they need. So it's a little bit like what's happening with the environment, is that you have sort of an absent Department of Health, EIS, as you will, if you will, for health studies. It's just absent. And I think, one, we need the review, and second, we need more of a community board model where you have elected local officials discussing and having real power over what happens, as opposed to a commission model or a SUNY board model, which can often lead to too much appointment power being exercised and also leads to this kind of old boy corruption. So I just think healthcare is a human right. I mean, I have a very basic view of that. In terms of universal healthcare, I think that our first step should be universal dental in schools and move towards universal healthcare, single payer.
Yeah, this is more on education. I'm on the board of the Literacy Volunteers of Otsego and Delaware counties. I'm against Common Core too, but the underlying thing, one thing in statistics I know that 1 in 5 adults in Otsego and Delaware County can't read past the 6th grade level. You know, and that's really sad because I've done some tutoring with a young guy like that. So that needs to have some light shed on it, and we need to have a solution so we can way reduce that number. You know, because I would like to be out of a job, you know, even though it's volunteer, you know, but that's something that really needs a lot of light on it.
I think that's right. I think my basic disagreement is that of a farmer I heard in North Carolina say, I don't know, it's now 10 years ago when the testing craze was just creeping in, which was you can't fatten a hog by weighing it. That doesn't mean you can't have high standards. And so I actually think that the expectations should be high. Those expectations can come from New York instead of Gates and Pearson and profit-making entities that don't actually care about our kids. But I think that, I think I've been pretty straightforward about the non-magic bullet. But I think it's actually investing in the things that make a school thrive. And in area after area, what you see Governor Andrew Cuomo say is, 1, take money away, 2, say it's not working, and then 3, say let's privatize it because it's not working. That's true in certainly in healthcare, that's true in the power authorities, and it's true in education. So we may spend a lot of money on education, but I think it's worth it. And I think our question should be, what are the resources that we know that will lead to more support so those kids can read? And I think that's complicated. I don't think that's a straightforward thing. But I appreciate the high standard approach because I never want to have low expectations. I think we can really have, when I say the greatest public schools in the country, that means the kind of standards you're talking about. Yes?
Could you give us your ideas on, you see a lot of signs, anti-fracking, you also see anti-SAFE Act. Do you have some response to that?
Yeah. It's not a big part of my campaign, but I'll tell you where I stand on it. I grew up in rural Vermont. My dad hunts and my brother hunts, and I certainly, no hunting people. I come from that culture. And I'm largely in favor of the SAFE Act, but I have a few real concerns. One real concern is the way in which it was passed. I think there's a serious question about whether it was constitutional, but whether or not it was unconstitutional, it was passed, basically middle of night, not without the 3-day waiting period. Whether or not it's unconstitutional, it's wrong, because the whole idea of having 3 days for people to engage is that you actually get feedback. But I think he should have done more than 3 days, which is that as a matter of process, and process really matters. You could hold hearings, really engage gun owners. Gun owners are not out to, gun owners are New York citizens too, and they have a voice. And we may disagree in the end on the substance, but you at least should go through the process and respect other people's voices. I'm also concerned about the privacy aspects, and I think the Veterans Administration has refused one of the features of the SAFE Act, which requires medical professionals to disclose when they think somebody is likely to cause harm, because that violates the the client privilege. So that's where I stand. Yes.
I'm Dave Brodsky. I'm a retired teacher and school social worker.
I love all the teachers here.
And I'm hoping, by the way, to join up and form a group of elder bats. So first thing I'd like to say is, I'm coming to meet this person, find out what she's about. And I got to say, if you survive working in a special ed setting, then you're tough enough to deal with this. I guess the question that's been on my mind a lot is, as you talked about, we're sliding into corporatism. And corporatism, by the way, was Mussolini's alternative term for fascism. We have to fix the system. It's definitely broken because it's being greased mightily by the Supreme Court. What do you think you could do as a Democrat to restore the party and the system as governor? Well,
thank you. And thank you for your service as a teacher. I do think the key here is the first step. There's a lot of things we got to do, but the first step is publicly funded elections, because who you raise money from becomes who you serve. And as much as Andrew Cuomo likes to come across as effective and strong, what he actually comes across as is somebody who serves his donors. And the actual policies, I call them right-wing because they're more Republican, but I don't think it's because there's a deep ideology there. I think it's because his donors want tax breaks. And even as a candidate, I'll be honest with you, we have some time tonight. I'm giving some chatty answers. If you guys want me to speed up, I will. But I'll tell you, as a candidate, here's the problem. I needed to get some attention, so I needed to raise some money. And since New York State does not have a public financing system, that means I needed to make a list of all the wealthiest people that I knew. Largely people that I agreed with, but the wealthiest people that I knew. And so when you're starting out in this campaign, at the very beginning of the campaign, your job is to spend as many hours a day as you can thinking about things that you happen to align with with the wealthiest people you know. That means you're not thinking about dental care. You're not thinking about the high cost of higher ed. You're not thinking about transit systems that aren't working, because you're thinking about your friends who may have issues you care about, but they all have an extra $2,000 to give or $1,000 to give, which most people don't have. So it turns people who want to be public servants into servants of a wealthy few. I have been lucky enough, and also I have the best campaign staff in New York. I've been lucky enough that in recent weeks, all our donations have been small dollar donations, and nobody's asking for anything but a better future for New York. So in the last filing period, which we just had to file last night, Andrew Cuomo, thank you very much. Thank you. This doesn't look anything like the water I saw in Pennsylvania at the fracking site. So in the last filing period, Andrew Cuomo had more donors than he'd had in any filing period, or in recent filing periods, which was 137. We had 3,800. And our average donation was $53. Now, if we had public financing of elections, and if I could have spent those early months in meetings only like this, because each of your $50, I like the matching fund system that based on what New York City has, which means that if I raise $50 from you, I get back $350 from the state or $300 from the state. I could have spent all my time talking to community groups, and I'd probably have $4 million. So there wouldn't be this sort of underdog tag that likes following me around. So it is extremely important, and maybe the reason Andrew Cuomo didn't actually push for public financing of elections is that he knew that somebody like me was waiting. No, but a serious point, I think that is the root issue. It's the root issue under all the issues. It's the reason he's silent about fracking is he's taken $1 million in pro-fracking interests. The reason that he is pushing for bank tax repeal, I think it's because of the millions of dollars he's taken from that. And the reason that his administration doesn't prosecute particular kinds of real estate LLC tax fraud that could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars is he's taken money from over 1,300 LLCs. So we just did a whistleblowing tour. That was fun. Blowing the whistle on Albany corruption. And what we're trying to talk about is it's not the illegal bribery, but the legal bribery in Albany that is the problem. And I'm going to take, I think, 3 more questions. How are we doing for time, Allie? This is, I have to boast about my press secretary. She's not only my niece, she was one of the 4 organizers of the XL Dissent rally in February in Washington, D.C., where 398 students got arrested protesting the XL pipeline. Like I said, I have the best campaign staff. So where are we for time? 7:30. Okay, great. So we can take a few more questions. Yes? Mm-hmm.
I'm a retired teacher also, but my focus here is a little bit on, you talk about the corruption in Albany. It's filtered down to a local level. And my question is, how can we get more, what's your position on more accountability? They won't respond to a FOIL request. They don't want to give you the information. Or if you catch, or you put the pieces together, the district attorney's not going to do anything. So that's a real concern of mine. And could you just address that, please?
I think it's a huge concern. One is, as Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I was the national director of the Sunlight Foundation. If I don't have a transparent government, I've got a problem with myself.
Don't change.
But the second is that with the DAs, you also have to look at how they are elected. And so public financing of elections at a local level is incredibly important, especially when it comes to taking on those in power. I just talked to a DA who had been fired demoted after he started actually prosecuting a local public corruption case. So the way that we fund elections across the board, he who pays the piper plays the tune, or however that goes, it's a problem across the board. The exciting thing, though, here's the exciting thing. I'm going to respond to both of your answers at once. I don't know, do any of you know who Larry Lessig is? Yeah. So he's been a close friend and ally of mine, and I steal this story from him. 96% of people think that money in politics is a serious problem. But 91% think there's nothing you can do about it. And so they give up. So you might think you want to fly, as Lessig says, but if you think the odds are you can't fly, you're just not going to practice. But the truth is there is something we can do about it. Public financing of elections has had a huge impact in the states where it's been passed. In Connecticut, after it was passed, the lobbyists would wait outside the bathroom door to talk to lawmakers because they no longer had the implicit quid pro quo relationship. It's not everything. There's other things we need to do. But it makes lawmakers not dependent on big donors, and that is the key. Yes?
I'm also a retired teacher as well. But I think there's an underlying issue. We're not talking about the schools and the teachers are being attacked that they're failing. It's an issue of poverty. And we have 1 in 5 children coming to school that don't know where their next meal is coming from, don't know when they're going to have their next meal. How can they possibly learn? What do you see as the answer here, or how to help address it?
I really agree with you, and I see that with housing too. Is that we both have to push for affordable housing, but the reason we have a housing crisis is because the underlying inequality. And we have, again, New York is the most unequal state, which means that, and we have increasing poverty and real poverty, along with increasing wealth. So that's upside down. And to me, the way to approach this, the traditional Democratic FDR way to approach this, is in the tax code. So the tax code of a state, I believe, is its moral code. It's where we say what we value and what we don't value, who we're going to take care of and who we're not going to take care of. And the current tax code in New York tells you that if you are the top 1%, or if you're a bank, or if you have a large estate, you are the most important person in this state, and we are going to give you tax breaks and loopholes, and we are not going to collect the revenue we need. And what this leads to is Astorino and Cuomo are very similar on this. They look at this state. I see this abundant, extraordinary state where we have the resources to take care, to make sure that people have good jobs by doing the traditional way to get good jobs, which is direct hiring, invest in our infrastructure, hire people for public jobs, do public works. But what they see is this, that you have to, they say everybody's going to leave this state if we don't give them tax breaks. They don't even claim it as a moral ground, but if we don't give them tax breaks, they'll leave. But this leads to us begging at the feet of oligarchs. I think it is a beggar's politics, and it is not the politics we should have. And we have an obligation to our health care for everyone, and we have an obligation to all children, and we have an obligation to people who can't find jobs, first to try to provide more good jobs, but also to be clear that when people are poor, we have to take care of them. So I just think that we need to turn our tax code right side up and make it a more traditional, progressive tax code.
I saw a film describing the running mate that he has chosen to run with. I think it's called Is She a Democrat or something
Yes.
like this. I wonder if you could say a few words on what her positions are.
Yes.
And have you any thoughts why he would choose such a person? Some people say it's an insurance policy, so that if he does get elected, we would rather stay with him than have the replacement.
Andrew Cuomo chose as his running mate Kathy Hochul, who's a bank lobbyist, who has run on the Conservative Party line, who's in her 2011 ad. I recommend that everybody see this because her votes in Congress are extremely conservative. She's a Keystone conservative. In other words, she's a pipeline supporter. She voted to censure Obama and voted to censure Holder. She says that this is because she represents a conservative district, but she has never gone back on those votes and publicly refuted them. And one of the things that I find very troubling is how she has built her political career. Tim and I both believe that New York is the state that is the most open to immigrants, the most open to people from all over the world. And we have to maintain that. It's part of who we are. And there's this national debate about immigration. Arizona's on one side, and we should be the leaders on the other side. So in 2011, Kathy Hochul in 2008 made her political career by saying that she would send, when Spitzer was proposing driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants, she said if anybody came to her as a clerk asking for a driver's license, she would send them to the sheriff. And then in 2011, this was the way she led her ads for Congress. My name is Kathy Hochul, and I led the fight against illegal immigrants getting driver's licenses. So everybody who sees that knows what that's about. She's saying there's us and there's them. This isn't an economic issue. This is her trying to give another explanation for people's economic woes, which is the them. I think that's totally irresponsible. I think it's wrong. I don't think it is the kind of Democrat that we should be supporting. She has a whole, we keep putting out Tim and I are putting out a dossier on Kathy Hochul on all her conservative votes, but it speaks to Kathy Hochul, and I hope you all support Tim Wu, the first Asian American statewide candidate. But also just recognize that it says something about Andrew Cuomo as well. That he chose somebody, you know why? Is he takes Democrats for granted in a state that is majority Democratic. He assumed that nobody would run. When I first announced I was running, he called somebody up and said, "What does she want?" Because if you're so used to transactional politics, you can't fathom the idea that I don't want a commission, I want to run for governor. So I think he picked her because he's so focused on the general election that he thought nobody would challenge him. And maybe he still thinks he's running for president, although after running against him, I will tell you he is not going to have a successful run for president. It's so far to the right of where New Yorkers are. That's what's so wrong here, is it is not representative of who we are and where we are. Okay, 2 more questions. You guys are great, but I can't. I think I have a radio interview at 8. Do I have it at 8:15 now, Allie, or no? Okay, yes. I'd be happy to answer your questions, but I think you and I have a scheduled interview too. No, I'll be short. I knew I was meeting you here. And here's to student newspapers. Yes, the lady in the blue.
I'm a retired teacher and adjunct.
What is this? I thought I was visiting
university and taught in New York City and was a substitute in about 5 counties. And I was poor in Chenango County. It never killed me, and I retired to the nightmare of fracking. I was born in Wisconsin, and that's where they get the frack sand from. And my concern is, excuse me, you can't hear me? I'm losing my touch. Okay, as I was saying, I'm concerned about the sand transfer station in Binghamton, and I'm concerned about shipping radioactive gas to New York City. And how will you stop this as a governor? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think what I understand is we don't even currently know where the sand is coming from, and that's part of the concern, so that we have to start with transparency, or am I wrong on that? Oh, so we know exactly where it's... Yes. So I just think in general we have to be banning, not just the waste, but all the fracking byproducts in New York State. Last week, as part of my whistleblower tour of New York, I visited Pennsylvania, which it may be unusual for a gubernatorial candidate in New York to do, but I felt it was really important because I've read the science, but you need to see it. And you need to see the water, and you need to talk to the people who've worked in the industry. And I think as governor, Andrew Cuomo should have to go and visit hydrofracking as it exists in other states. That should be a basic obligation.
I'm not a teacher or retired. Okay.
I was beginning to suspect something was up.
But I work at a local business that makes beer and sells it around the country. And we sell in, yeah. And we sell in, I think right now, 47 states. So while I applaud your positions on anti-fracking and on educational issues and all those things, I have a very direct question, and that's about transportation infrastructure, which you mentioned, because one of the things that we find difficult, and I'm sure other businesses do, is moving our goods, because it all has to move by truck. If we had better rail service, it'd be much more economical. I'm just wondering if you have anything to say about that, that's all.
You can be writing my campaign speeches. No, that's actually one of the reasons I care a lot about transportation infrastructure, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, so that you have the distribution systems that you need. And I'd love to talk to you more about what in particular, but we need to be moving towards rail. It's an embarrassment, where we are compared to other countries. Yes.
Another special idea. Say that education is number one. We have to figure out some way to attract people to become teachers. With 18 years of credit, they put me in tier 4 for retirement. Yeah. And if I would pay $3,000 in arrears, they would give me $88 a month retirement. We hear how much teachers make in their retirement. Now they have tier 5 and they have tier 6, which Cuomo passed. How can that be remedied?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, so thank you, first of all. I think attracting good teachers is both making sure that we take care in the benefits package, but also making sure that we respect them in their current jobs and really respect them as the professionals that they are. But I'm a pretty traditional Democrat in thinking that, you know, a fair pension is important. The freezes, you know, the freezes that teachers have had to go through, or the effective freezes, are not the way we need to go if we want to attract talent. And that what Governor Cuomo has been an enemy of unions from the beginning, just an enemy, sort of out to kill them. It's one of the reasons I got the Public Employees Federation endorsement, is despite the pressure they were under, which was significant, they felt like fundamentally his goal was not to be a partner, but rather to get rid of them altogether. And as governor, I will be a partner in negotiations, starting with constant communication and figuring out exactly what we need and asking questions like the one you're asking, which is not just what's the bottom line, but what do we need to do to both bring in and then take care of our public employees. So thank you. One more. Yes.
Thank you for doing your the Reddit AMA. I thought that was awesome. Also, yeah, I'm a student. I noticed there's like not very many young people here. And how else can we get young people interested in your campaign?
Well, one of the reasons Tim and I are running is I think that we need to have a new kind of politics after 2008. You know, we've had this crash, we've had this crisis of inequality, and we're still trying to do the same old politics. And we got to be dreaming big again, because cynical politics are not going to draw new people in. I think we need a lot more interactive politics, including the Reddit AMA, for those of you who know what that is. So I think we should probably end now. Dennis, thank you so much for pulling together this extraordinary forum, and thank all of you. 10 days. 10 days.
Last filing period, 3,800 people were able to contribute an average of $50 to this underdog. I see a couple of hundred people in here who have an average of $50. So Allie is going to need those clipboards, and as you exit, she needs the clipboards with the papers, because if you choose to donate, she'll need your information. You can donate as you go. If you want to hang around, that's fine, and I could take checks and information and get them to the campaign also. There's snacks back there, and my wife will be heartbroken if you don't take some cookies and cheese, so please do. So the clipboards go to Allie at the door. Get your checkbooks out. Dig deep for this underdog. Thank you so much.